right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to another episode of IT Pro TV. I'm Don Pizzette, today with Mr. Ronnie Wong. How's it going, Ronnie?
It is going extremely well today. Once again, I now have $1 on my Google Rewards. So
Nice.
yes, I have a whole $1. So I've only done like 4,000 surveys.
Now, have you figured out how you're going to spend this wealth? I mean, do we need to work on a budget and
so.
cost schedule?
I think so. Yeah.
Well,
I don't want to
unfortunately,
spend it all in one place.
yeah, you got to take it easy. Don't go crazy with your newfound wealth.
That's right.
Unfortunately, we're not ready to jump into cost scheduling yet. We'll get a chance to see that a little bit later. But what we are going to do is take a look at time scheduling and all that good stuff. I was telling Ronnie before the show, this is really the biggest section of the entire, really of the entire PMBOK. If we go and look at our process groups and all that stuff, let me just pull it up here. So when we go in here and take a look, you've got your 5 phases and all the stuff that happens. When you take a look at it in here, project time management has 6 different processes just in the planning phase, right? We got an extra one down here in monitoring, but nobody else has 6 processes all in one phase, right? You got like 4 there, and risk gets kind of close, doesn't it? It's got 5. But time and schedule, that's really the big one. And unfortunately, a lot of people, when they look at project management, this is all they think of. When most people first hear you say the words project management, they're thinking of this right here. They're thinking of how we manage our schedule. They're not really thinking about how we manage people, money, how we do our planning ahead of time, how we do our monitoring. They don't think about that stuff. This is it. And in a small company, that may be all you need. If you're doing internal projects, you may not need all the other pieces. And so you really just end up working in this one little area. Now, I gotta be careful and not call it one little area because it's a big chunk. So this is an area we definitely need to make sure we understand. And we're gonna move through each of the processes. You'll see they just make pretty common sense for the most part. But we need to know our terminology, and we definitely need to know all the tools and techniques because there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
All right, so let's start off with the plan schedule management. Now we saw this back when we were doing scope management. Planning schedule management, that just means creating our schedule management plan. Kind of silly, but basically a definition that states how we are going to handle our schedule. And in a established company that's been following formal project management practices, I almost said stuff, for a company that's been doing this formally, you've already got it. You just go to your PMO or check with the project management manager and ask them, hey, can I have a copy of the plan for our schedule management? And they'll have it, you get it, and off you go, right? But if this is the very first project you've done, you're gonna have to draft one. You may choose to draft it ahead of time and then get to work, or you might wanna go ahead and just get to work, move through the other 5 processes and figure out what works for you. Once you've got it all figured out and you know what works for you, you take that and you use it to draft your schedule management plan. And then in the future, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you already know what to do. So it's up to you how you wanna go about that. Since we've already talked about that process, I don't wanna spend a ton of time on it, but let's just take a quick look at planning schedule management. So I've got my diagram here. Our inputs, it's almost identical to the scope management plan, right? We have our project management plan, if we've already got one. That's an input. Our project charter, which may be one of the only documents we have at this point. Our enterprise environmental factors, so any regulations, standards, any other things that we have to follow as part of our corporate policies. And then organizational process assets, any templates or previous projects that our company might have that we can build off of. We take that and we apply our expert judgment, analytical techniques, and meetings to it to determine what's going to be the best plan, how we want our company to handle schedule plans, right? What are the rules that they're going to follow when they create a schedule? And our output is simply that schedule management plan. And I've got a little template here I can show you guys of what a schedule management plan looks like right here. And there's not too much to it, right? Schedule methodology. What is the method that we recommend our project managers use for creating a schedule, right? And that method can be working based on an end date, working based on a start date. It can be using any of a number of charts and theories that are out there. It's whatever works for your environment. Schedule tools is a really important one because you might have Microsoft Project, Primavera, whatever, some various software package that you like to use. So we specify that in here. Other tools include things like resource leveling and 3-point estimates, all this other kind of stuff. You list the tools that you want people to use as they build their schedule. Then you identify inside of the schedule any categories, any units of measure, any variance thresholds that you're going to be using. Units of measure is a big one. You don't want to micromanage your schedule. If I have an employee working, I don't need to know what they're doing minute by minute, right? So here we usually set how we're going to measure time. Most people choose 8-hour blocks.
Right.
And so you'll put, a day equals 8 hours so that everybody knows that, hey, when we do a schedule, one day isn't 24 hours, one day is 8 hours. And 1 week is 5 days, Monday through Friday. These are the kind of units of measure that we need to specify so that everybody follows it the same way through the project schedules. All right. Schedule reporting and format. As we do reporting on this, what format do we expect to have? What level of reporting? So again, that it's consistent. And then under process management, we're about to see all of this. We're going to see how to identify activities, how to sequence the activities, resources, durations, and effort. So we're going to take a look at each of these. This is just saying, here's how we handle those processes. We might find that in our company, we don't like to do certain aspects, and so we might cancel this out and say we don't participate in this particular feature. Or we say, here's how we estimate duration, or here's how you need to go about handling this, here's how you need to report it. So we can specify for each of those processes, all right? Those are some of the things that we'll find in that schedule management plan. And when it's drafted, that becomes a part of our project management plan, and now we have it available for future projects. Again, if you don't have this already, if this is something you're doing your very first project, skip over this process. Skip over it, because what you can do is you can go and start moving through all of these various processes. Let me get back to this document here. You can move through define activities. And you can figure out, like, for you, what works best for defining an activity. And when you figure it out, when you figure out what works best for you as you define the activities for this project, you then take that method and you go back to your plan schedule, or your schedule management plan, and you put your method in there. And that way you can use that method again next time. And you do the same thing for sequence activities, estimate resources, estimate durations, and develop the schedule, each one contributing to that plan. All right. So let's get to the real work, Ronnie. Or did I leave anything out? I mean, it really is pretty straightforward.
I think we actually did cover that. Yep.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into the next part, which is define activities. All right. If we're going to schedule things, we need to know what we've got to schedule. What work is going to happen? Now that key word there, work, that's important. In the last episode, we talked about work breakdown structures, how we take a project and we break it into the individual work packages, the stuff that people actually have to do.
Right.
All right. Well, we need to schedule that work to happen, and there's several things that fall into place that are going to affect when we can do this. The three things that kind of fall into place. We've got the resources. There's a person that has to do that work. When is that person available? They're going to have certain times and so on when they're available, and so we've got to work around that. There's budget. We might have budgeted the money for that activity, but we might not have that money right away. We might not get that money until next month. So we need to schedule that activity to happen next month when the funds are available. All right. And then the third thing is the schedule itself. I might not be able to have two activities overlapping. One activity might depend on another one, and so I've got to sequence that and put them in order. So we're going to see that as we define our activities first and then turn around and sequence them. Now, quick comment on terms that we're going to hear.
Yeah.
We're going to hear work packages, we're going to hear activities, and we're going to hear tasks. All right. Those three words, a lot of project managers use them interchangeably. And that's a problem. It's a problem, well, on the exam at least it's a problem. In real life, it's not that big of a deal. Most people understand. On the exam, when you're looking at a work breakdown structure, everything in there is a work package. That's physical work that needs to be done. When you look at a schedule, all the things in the schedule are an activity. One activity might include more than one work package, right? Or it might be a one-to-one relationship where one activity in your schedule equals one work package in the WBS. They're not necessarily identical, all right? A big difference there is that in the WBS, it's not chronological, but in the schedule, it has to be by definition, and so we're starting to rearrange things. So they may be a very different order. The third term, though, task, don't use it, all right? Don't use it ever. If you go through the PMBOK, I think the word task is only used once or twice, because, and even then it's them saying don't use this word. And it's because it gets confusing. So the PMI settled on activity. We schedule activities. But if you fire up Microsoft Project, what are you creating? Tasks. And so a lot of us use Microsoft Project and we call them tasks. It's very, very common. Even in non-Microsoft products, right? So like here during the show, I'm going to use Gantt Project. If you've never heard of Gantt Project, it's a open source, freely available project management software. It runs on Linux, OS X, and Windows, so it's very flexible and it doesn't cost a dime. So it's a great one if you're just learning and you don't want to go out and buy a copy of Microsoft Project. You can use this to mess around with. And when you come in here, like in your Gantt chart, you'll see you're creating tasks, new tasks. So most project management software refers to them as tasks. The PMI doesn't. On the exam, if you see an answer and the answer has the word task in it, that's the wrong answer, right? You need to make sure you say activity.
Yep.
You know, terminology.
Oh yeah.
Always
It's
adds
important.
in. All right, so let's take a look at what's involved in defining activities. Actually, let me go to my pretty drawing here. Defining activities. All right, we have our inputs that are going to come in. If we have a you know, I wrote these kind of fast apparently and didn't pay attention to spelling. There we go, schedule. So we have our schedule management plan, if we have one. And in the schedule management plan, it tells us how to define activities, what we consider to be an activity and what's going to get logged in here. If we don't, we're going to figure that out right now. Our scope baseline that was created in the last section when we did the scope management, this is going to state basically the work that needs to get done. That scope baseline, what we've agreed on, has the high-level entries, and then we attached a requirements list, and so that requirements list breaks it down more. But we'll also need things like our WBS to go into real detail and figure out all the different things that truly need to be done. And then our enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. So those we kind of expect. So we're gathering this information together, and now it's time to get to work. All right? Well, step one is one that we should be familiar with, decomposition. We saw decomposition in the last section when we were talking about the work breakdown structure. You create your deliverables, and then you decompose them into the work packages that need to be done, and then you decompose those down into the work they need to be done. All right? So you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, why do I want to do that here if I've already done it back on the WBS? And the answer is you probably have.
No.
And if you have, then you don't need to do it again. All right? But there are two scenarios where we're going to have this come into play. One, if you didn't do the WBS.
Right.
Remember that all of this is modular. You pick and choose the processes you want. Many organizations skip the WBS and cut right to this and develop right in the schedule. And the reason they do that, if you're using Microsoft Project, does it have a work breakdown structure mode? Well, it actually does now, and it sucks. So you can do it there, but it's not very good. So it's better to just go right into the Gantt chart, start scheduling stuff there, and that's what a lot of people do. So if that's the case, you'll be decomposing right there in the Gantt chart as you're doing your schedule. All right. So that's kind of what we're going to see. I throw that term out. Let me just make sure. You should at this point already know what a Gantt chart is, just because it's one of the most common charts in project management. But if you don't, let me just here, we'll do a Google image search real quick to find one. Let's see. We're going to look for a Gantt chart. And a Gantt chart, it is a very, very typical thing that we see in project management. Let me just zoom in on this. There. Where basically you have your tasks here on the left, and see how it lays them out as bars here to show the tasks in a particular order, and it actually shows their relationships. We'll talk about that later. But basically this chart helps us to see what needs to be done, when it's going to be done, and its relationship to the other activities. And most of the software will even let us track our progress, so we can see how far along we are inside of them. And the charts are pretty easy to work with. If I go back here, I can come in here and I can say, all right, I got task 1, task 2, task 3, right? And you've got a begin date and an end date, and so I can come in here and I can specify what that end date is going to be. So maybe this is like a 2-dayer. This one is going to be more, so we'll take it and bump it up to like a 5-day activity. All right, so I'm starting to kind of set these out for when they're going to occur and how long they're going to take. Here, I'll just adjust this one right here. And then I can take them and I can link them together there. And we start to map that relationship. And so now I can see, hey, on May 23rd, I've got task 1 starting, and it's going to run up over the weekend. That's what these gray bars are here, is the weekend. And then on Monday and Tuesday, we got task 2, and then Wednesday going forward, we've got task 3, and we can start to kind of chart that and map it. It does make things pretty easy and helps us to better track that.
Yeah, in a graphical representation, right, we need to see the activities, but we also need to see them laid out in comparison to one another. Will they start at the same time? Will they not? These are things that we actually just have to be able to see very quickly sometimes, because decisions need to be made, and we can either spend time trying to figure that out or be able to see it very quickly. Gantt charts help us to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the more sophisticated your software, the more stuff it can do. So like if this were a Microsoft project, there's actually a lot more it can do. And we're going to do another show down the road on Microsoft project. That's what I normally use. But the PMI, the exam, the PMP exam, it's vendor neutral, right? It's really about the PMBOK. It's not about the software that you choose. So I wanted to use different software so that people can kind of separate that in their mind. Otherwise, they always think Microsoft Project. And I'll be honest with you, Microsoft Project, it's some of the best project management software out there, but it does some squirrely stuff. It's really weird how it does some of its mathematical calculations. So using third-party software is not a bad idea sometimes. So, all right. So that's kind of an example right there of what we might see. And if we're decomposing there, you start coming up with these tasks, and then you create subtasks and things underneath as you start breaking it down into the individual components. And so you'll see that as you work with the software. All right. So that's kind of an example of decomposition. We've really already seen that one in the previous one. Trying to make sure I don't miss anything here. All right. So the next thing is rolling wave planning. Rolling wave planning for most companies is a bad thing. In really, really large, long-running projects, though, it becomes essential. So what is it? Well, if your project is a 6-month project, you can probably sit down, talk to your subject matter experts, kind of figure things out, and you can come up with a plan that covers your 6-month project. You can figure out your schedule, your budget, that's really easy to deal with, right? But what if you're NASA? And your project is to put a family on Mars. Your goal is to put a family on Mars. Well, that project is probably going to take 10, 20, maybe 30 years. Take a long time, right? How are you supposed to plan your budget today for an event that's going to happen 20 years from now? You can't. You don't know what inflation's going to be like. You can't predict the cost of materials 20 years from now. I mean, just look at our housing market, where housing values change year to year, sometimes up, sometimes down, sometimes way down.
Right.
And so it really varies. You can't predict that far. In fact, most companies don't even bother predicting past a 5-year mark. That's why they have what's called a 5-year plan, right? 5 years is about as far ahead as anybody can predict. So how does rolling wave planning work? Well, the way it works is you sit down and you create your schedule, your budget, and all that, and maybe you plan it out for the next 3 years, all right? Just 3 years. You know you've got a 20-year project, but you just plan it out for the next 3 years. Now, for the remaining 17 years, 20-year project, right? So for the remaining 17 years, you just do high-level planning. Here's the work we need done. We're not going to plan the budget yet. It's too far out. Or we might just do some ballpark stuff, but not really accurate, right? We're going to be accurate for the first 3 years, right? When year 1 is over, now you start planning for year 4, all right? Let me kind of illustrate this. Do I have Excel? I think I do. Excel makes it easy to kind of demonstrate. All right, so let's say, that's a little bit on the small side, there. All right, so let's say I've got, year 1, year 2. What are the odds of it doing a sequence, Ronnie? You think it'll do it?
Sure.
Yeah, we'll go all the way to year 30 just because that's where my mouse went. All right, so here's all my years, okay? So I come up with a detailed plan, right? And by plan, I mean my schedule, my budget, my resources, very detailed for years 1, 2, and 3, all right? And then For the remaining ones, I just create an estimate or an estimation for what's going to happen in year 4, year 5, all the way through to year 30. Those are all just estimates because it's just too far out for me to predict, right? Then, when year 1 is done, when year 1 is over, I sit down and in year 2, I plan for year 4, okay? So I reach out and I say, okay, now this 3-year window, so here's the 3 years I had a detailed plan for. Now that I'm in year 2, I come up with a detailed plan here, right? So if I were to, let me rewrite that a different way. So now we come in here and we say, starting in year 2, I'll have a detailed plan for these guys, right? And then I continue kind of following that method as I continue to move year to year. So in year 5, I should have a detailed plan for 5, 6, and 7, and we just continue going, all right? This is called rolling wave planning. Think of the waves rolling in from the ocean. Here's our first wave. Our first wave only goes to year 3, right? And then the tide goes back. And then our second wave goes all the way to year 4, and then the tide goes back. And the next wave goes to year 5, and then I'm going to make everybody have to go to the bathroom. Yeah. So too many water references. So that's why they call it rolling wave. You plan as you go. On a short project, that's a terrible idea. You plan as you go. You could ruin things 6 months from now because you didn't look ahead and plan for it. All right. But on a 20-year project, on a 30-year project, you don't have a choice. There's no alternative. You really have to do this. And you'll see this with NASA, with the government, with school boards, right? Where school boards, good God, they make some kind of a change, and then they've got to monitor children and how they develop and what kind of jobs they get. I mean, just that alone takes 20 years. You got to see them graduate school and go out and get jobs. Those are long-term projects, and it's just not feasible to try and predict the future. If it was, well, I'd be in Vegas right now. That's right. I care about IT, but Vegas. Anyhow, right. so that's rolling wave planning. It's a great tool for long-term projects. All right, so that's another one that we can make use of. Really, a pretty good one. We've got what were some of the other ones?
Expert judgment.
Oh, good old expert judgment. Always making it in there. So expert judgment, just using what's in our head. With defined activities, what is it we're trying to do? Well, we're trying to create a list of the activities that need to be performed. Now, if we already have a WBS, sorry, I sneezed.
Yeah, and we already have a WBS then. That means that we're actually just about ready to make sure that now we have the activities planned and we can start to schedule a little bit more, start to put things now into our list here, which now we need to define a little bit better here in terms of actually adding in some attributes, right?
Yep, so like when we were planning this segment, I should have planned on having a half-stifled sneeze. So you go back and you look at your WBS, and you've already got, if you did your WBS, you've already got your list of what work needs to be done. So that's pretty much what's going to become your activity list. That's where you start. But that's not always the case, all right? The PMI has a very simple recommendation. They say that when it comes to scheduled activities, you don't want to micromanage. You don't want to try and manage people hour by hour. So what they recommend is to use something called the 880 rule, all right? The 880 rule is a super simple rule. It's a rule that says don't have any activities that are less than 8 hours. If you have an activity that's only 4 hours, combine it with something else. Combine it with the next activity and have that be one thing, because it's just too hard to track within a small period like that. So don't have any activities under 8 hours, all right? And then 80, don't have any activities over 80 hours. So use that as the maximum. Every 80 hours, you should break it up into another activity, because after 80 hours, right, which is really 2 weeks, if you think 2 work weeks, right, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's 40 hours. So anything over 80 hours in duration or 2 weeks, then break that into another activity. If you think about how we do reporting,
right.
If I say, all right, this activity is going on, I want to report at each quarter, so 25% complete, 50% complete, 75% complete. If it's an 8-hour task, that means I'm going to get 4 status reports in one day on one activity, all right? If it starts falling behind schedule or something, can I correct it in that one day? Not really. So there's not a whole heck of a lot of point in dealing with that many reports on a single day activity. On an 80-hour project or activity, I might get 2 updates a week. Now that's a lot different. The activity starts on Monday. On Wednesday, they tell me I'm a little bit behind. Now I got time to deal with it, right? On Friday, they say we're back on schedule. And then the next Wednesday, they say we're moving along, and then on Friday, it should be done. So now you're getting updates at a much more regular interval. Now, that 880 rule, I hate that they say rule, it's just a recommendation.
Yeah.
You can have activities as short or as long as you want. If your project is so fast that it's going to occur entirely in one day, you might go hour by hour. If you think about like a rock concert, somebody's putting on a rock concert, there's a lot of activities that happen all during a 2-hour performance.
Right.
You know, you have set changes, you have costume changes, pyrotechnics, detonation times and stuff, and they'll manage that minute by minute because that makes sense in their environment, right? And if you're NASA and you're putting a man on the moon, there's going to be a lot of things that take more than 80 hours in that process, and you may want to monitor them as a whole. So if you're talking about like the Hubble telescope, the creation of that lens, that took more than 80 hours, but they tracked it in a larger element. We'll talk about sub-projects later, and sub-projects can actually be a really long duration activity. So just be aware there are times when you should do something shorter or longer, but as a rule of thumb, just a general kind of guideline, 880, that's what you want to shoot for when you start defining your activities. So you may find that you're grouping work breakdown or work packages together to create something that fits within that 880 window. So your activity list is not necessarily going to match your work package list from the work breakdown structure. It's not necessarily going to be exact. All right. Some of the other things that we're going to have outputting in this phase are the activity attributes. Again, if we have a work breakdown structure and that work breakdown structure has a WBS dictionary, then we probably already have all the attributes attached to those activity or those packages. But if we don't, then right here when we create our activity list, we start creating the attributes. Now, the attributes at a minimum are going to be 3 things, and we might not have them all yet, so we might have to come back to it. It's going to be duration. That's what we really care about. How long is that activity going to take? And the second thing is the resources. What people, materials, and equipment does this particular activity need? Those are the resources. Because that is going to affect scheduling. And then the cost. How much money is this going to cost us, and when is the money needed? Because there's some activities where you got to pay up front, right? If you're having a catered event and they're bringing food in, they want you to pay ahead of time, right? But if it is a contractor that's doing work for you, you probably pay 50% up front and 50% at completion or something like that, depending on your contract. So the money might be paid afterwards. So we need to know that. We need to know what it's going to cost and when it's going to cost. All right. We can use that as we start to plan out our schedule and balance things together. So we got to get that information from somewhere. We haven't done cost and resources yet. So again, we might have to come back to this. We might not be ready with all that information, or we might just do what we can, and then later when we get more information, we feed it right back in and go through this process a second time or a 12th time or whatever. That's what planning is all about. And then lastly is that milestone list. Now, we came up with a milestone list way back with the charter, and we did a milestone list again when we talked about the scope statement. Now, you may not have. You didn't have to. Those were optional components. So if you didn't have a milestone list then, now it's easier to create one because you've got your activity list. Now you know what activities are going to be done. You can choose the appropriate milestones throughout there. If you've already got your milestones, maybe you'll find there's some new ones you want to add or some that are less relevant than you thought before, and so you may adjust them. So this may be an all new milestone list or just a modification of the one that we've already created.
All right.
All right. When we go to define the activities themselves, there's several different ways to do it, but somewhere in here I've got my activity list. Here. So we've got like our activity attributes sheet that we use, and the activity list. You'll see resource requirements and several things. We'll do estimates later. But let me just pull up activity attributes. You'll notice this looks very similar to the work breakdown structure or WBS dictionary. And so we'll see various things like the description of the work, the number of resources, and some other values in here. We're going to talk a lot about these as we start to do our relationship information, successors, lead and lag, and so on. These are our values that we haven't talked about yet. But this is very similar to the WBS dictionary except it's got additional things that are a little more scheduling related in them that are going to determine, do we need specific people to perform this task? Those people might only be available on certain days. And so we've got to plan around that, as well as successors, the relationship stuff. I can't put the roof on the house unless the walls are up first. And so that's going to determine my sequencing, which we're also going to talk about a little bit later. All right. And then our activity list, well, it's just a list. It's really straightforward. You give the activity a number, you give it a name, and then a description of the work. You can create the list right here like this, or you can use your project management software and you can create it here. Here's my activity, here's a begin date, end date, so we're starting to record information right here. And if we double click on an individual activity, we can see here's our notes, our predecessors, our relationship stuff, our duration, all that same information that was in that list a moment ago, it's all here too. So instead of doing an activity detail form and an activity list, you might just choose to use your project management software here. But again, the PMI, they say you don't have to use project management software at all. You can manage an entire project in just Excel and Word if you want, really just Word. It's more challenging, but you can definitely do it. All right. Well, that's probably a pretty good spot for us to stop and take a break. We've got plenty more scheduling processes to tackle as we move through. We've really only gotten through the first two. Right. So we got a lot more to see. Definitely stay tuned, and we'll be back in just a few. All right, welcome back, everybody. So in the last segment, we basically created our activity list. So the list of every activity that needs to be performed in our project. And, we covered it in one segment, but in real life land, it might take you hours, days, weeks to create that list because you've got to interact with the various people attached to your project, figure out each and every one. It's a pretty exhaustive process, right? Right. Once we've got it, though, the next thing we have to do is what's called sequencing. We've got to put those activities in order. When you're dealing with something like your WBS, you were just coming up with the work packages, not necessarily the order they needed to be performed in. Now we need to sit down and evaluate that. So we're going to take our activity list as well as our activity attributes if we've got them, and now we're going to start putting them together into a sequence. All right. Now it makes sense that we have activity list and attributes. What are some of these other things? Well, the schedule management plan is going to define how we sequence activities, if we have one. The milestone list. Remember, a milestone, it's not an activity in and of itself. All a milestone is a marker that says, hey, at this point, you should have achieved this goal. It's like a tracking goal. The project scope statement, which may have things like what our deadline is that we're trying to work towards, our enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. So the input side, nothing shocking here. But on the tools and techniques side, here's where we start to get some really important things. The first thing is precedence diagramming method, or PDM. All right. The precedence diagramming method is a simple way of diagramming when one activity leads into another. And we're going to definitely be talking about this quite a bit, but just to kind of set a preview, let me pull up a network diagram here. And I don't want to fixate too much on these various activities and what all these values mean. We're going to get to that. But I've got an activity right here, and it's leading to another activity here. And you'll see the arrow that I've drawn, just a straight up arrow moving along. This relationship that these have is a pretty standard relationship called a FS, or finish to start relationship. When we deal with precedence diagramming method, what we're doing is dealing with these relationships. Let's see, I've got that list here. Dealing with this list right here, there's 4 methods that our activities can be tied to each other. If I say that one activity has to be done before another activity can start, so building a house, the walls have got to be up before we can put the roof on. Can't put the roof on until the walls are up, right? That is said to be a finish to start relationship. We have to finish putting the walls up before we can start even the first little bit of work on putting that roof up, all right? finish to start is what you're going to use.
Majority.
If you're like me, it's over 90% of the
Yeah.
time. This is what you almost always use because that's what sequencing is all about. This has to finish, then this next thing can happen. All right. Occasionally, though, you have activities that might be tied to each other as far as when they can start. All right. So, for example, I might have my electricians and my plumbers ready to come and wire and plumb the house. All right. But I tell them, hey, you guys, you got to wait till the walls are up. And when the walls are up, you guys can come in and start to run the plumbing and the electrical and all that good stuff, right? Well, in that scenario, I could do finish to starts. I could say when the walls finish, then the electricians can start. And when the walls finish, the plumbers can start, all right? Or what I could do is I could say when the walls finish, the electricians can start. And when the electricians start, the plumbers can start also. A start-to-start relationship. When one starts, the other starts. Where I normally see this is in areas where you've got governance or some kind of inspector attached to it. So maybe you're doing some kind of environmental activity, and so an EPA inspector has to be on site. All right. So you have an activity that is your environmental activity, and you have another activity that's the EPA inspector monitoring. Those two might have a start-to-start relationship. When we start doing our environmental work, the EPA inspector can start doing his inspecting. He can't start inspecting until his other one starts also, because that's what he's inspecting, right? So those scenarios, we have what's called a start-to-start relationship. And if we were to rank these in the order, they're in the order here from the PMBOK, right? But if we were to put them in the order of like most common to least common, finish to start to start, we would have a very similar relationship here. This would like be second place, start to start. One activity starts, the other activity can only start if the first activity is started also. So that is a start to start.
Yeah.
This is normally represented, if I were to go, let's see, here, and see how I've got this arrow coming off of here going straight to task 2, and I've got this arrow coming off and going down to task 4. Well, let me represent this a little bit different here. I'm going to add in some new tasks. I'm going to do task 6 and task 7. And I'm going to take task 7, and I'm going to set a predecessor of task 6, and I'm going to set it to start. All right, so task 7 can start when task 6 starts. Now it assigned a weird date to it, but let's go into our PERT chart here. And they don't really designate it very well, do they? Let me change these start dates so they're the same. Is it not going to let me manipulate that?
It looks like you have a couple of predecessors.
Oh, I've got more than one predecessor. That'll do it. Yeah, let me get rid of that. There we go. All right, so task 6 is our only predecessor, and it's a start to start.
Yep, there you go.
There we go. All right, well, they're not illustrating. So like in Microsoft, in Microsoft Project, what it'll actually do is it'll put these guys side by side like this, and the start-to-start relationship will actually come out of the backside, and they'll both have arrows pointing in. But see how it's basically showing it's coming and doubling back here to this one. But it's letting me know that this is not a normal relationship, not finish to start. I can see it over here where I've designated that it is a start to start. Yeah, right there. So when task 6 starts, task 7 is able to start right afterwards, and you'll see I can have the same begin date. And if I change the begin date of 1, if I take task 6 and I move its begin date, which, let's see if I can get back to that. So if I take task 6 and I want to move it.
There you go. Nope.
Well, geez, is it not going to let me? So if I move task 6, there we go. See how task 7 moved along with it, and they still both have the same start date. So start to start, they can both start at effectively the same time. One starting triggers the other to start. All right. Along those same lines, we have finish to finish.
Yeah.
One can't finish until the other finishes. They're tied to each other. All right. So I might have an activity that says, if we're building the house, when the house is done, we've got to get an inspector to come and sign off on it, right? So I might have an activity of get the house inspected. Well, that can't finish unless building the house is finished. If people are still making changes to the house, the inspector won't inspect it. So I might set a finish to finish on that activity. The house has to be finished being constructed before the inspector can sign off on it. Now, that doesn't mean the inspector can't even start until we're done. The inspector can start early and inspect the parts that have already been finished, but the inspector won't be finished until the house itself is finished also. They would have a finish to finish relationship.
Yeah. Sometimes you can also see this in tasks that also need to finish, let's say, on about the same date. So taking the house analogy here, we may go ahead and say, look, at the same time we're painting the inside of the house, we want to go ahead and start landscaping the outside as well, so that they tend to finish about the same date here, so we can turn those keys over when we're actually ready to go. So not only do we have that strict dependency, the way that Don described, it could just be we want to make sure that these finish on the same date. It may take, let's say, 3 days to actually finish all the landscape. Let's say it only takes a couple of days to finish the painting. Well, we just want to say, look, as long as you finish by this date, you guys can start whenever you want to. Just make sure you're done by here.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And then the last one that we have is the start to finish. Now, this one I never use. I've never actually had need to use it in any environment. Basically, what you're saying here is that you can't start one activity, or you can't finish one activity until another activity starts. And this is a bizarre one, right? It's hard to kind of wrap our mind around it. And the example that I always give is in college, you have exams. You have like midterms and semester exams, all right? Well, I can't start studying for that exam until I know when it is, right? So I need to know when the exam is. And when I figure out when that exam is, now I can figure out when I need to study. So studying happens before the exam, but it's the exam itself that determines when I study. I'm not gonna study 5 months before the exam, but if I know the exam is in March, I'll start my studying in February, right? And I can't finish studying until the exam starts. I'm actually studying right up until the point when that exam starts itself. So it's really the start of the exam that determines when my studying finishes. So it's called a start to finish relationship, all right? Even though you have one activity that happens first, that entire activity is dependent on this other activity starting. I don't finish studying until the exam starts. So it's kind of backwards to what we normally have, where one activity happens first, and then based on that, something happens afterwards. That's how really a lot of these other ones work, but this one is kind of backwards. And there's not a lot of ones that work on this. If you were thinking about like getting the house inspected, all right, I want to get the house inspected on July 31st. So I might have an activity that says, file an application to get the house inspected. And that process of filing the application and securing them, they might tell me at the city, you can only send it in 30 days prior to when you want it inspected. So now it's when I want it inspected that determines when I need to file. And so I then do a start to finish. The start of the inspection is going to determine when I would finish that application period. So it's weird. It's kind of hard to wrap our mind around, and it's not one that's very commonly used. But these are the 4 methods of precedence diagramming. And on the exam, you'll see them by their 2-letter initials. FS, finish to start, SS, start to start, FF, finish to finish, and SF, start to finish. And just know that the majority of what you do is going to be finish to start. When I go into Microsoft Project or Gantt Project or any of these,
Default.
when we, that's not what I wanted. When we go in here and we start creating some new tasks, if I do task 8 and task 9, and then I link them together, when I link them together, it's doing a finish to start. That's what it does by default. You'll see the little arrow that gets drawn. When task 8 finishes, task 9 then starts. That's the way that it assumes that we want to go. And then from there, if I pull up task 9, I can go into predecessors. You'll see its predecessor is task 8, and I can change it from there. If I want it to be finished to finish, and I change it, see how the arrow now starts to go backwards? Let me That's as far as I can zoom in, I guess. But you can see it there. It starts to go backwards, or if I go into the PERT, well, it doesn't show it here in the PERT diagram.
Yeah, it looks
All right,
same,
but
yeah.
here you see the arrow going backwards versus over here, that start to start, you can see the arrow going forward. So that one's a little bit more, representative. You'll see these arrows change direction based on what it is that you're trying to set up, what relationship you're setting up. So that's the precedence diagramming method. When you start to have all these activities, what we'll normally do is we'll have a meeting, kind of like a brainstorm meeting. And you'll throw up on the board all the different activities, and based on the various people in the room, you'll start rearranging the activities. And it's kind of nice to do it on the board or in software like this because it's quick and easy to move things around. And so you start moving them around, you start drawing your arrows. We're doing the first pass at trying to get everything in order, in the order it needs to occur in. Now keep in mind that this list over here does not have to be in order. Notice how task 1 for me starts on 523, but task 9 starts on 513. Task 9 is starting before task 1, and that's perfectly fine in a Gantt chart. It's going to represent it over here based on the dates, and we'll see everything kind of fall in place. That is a normal happening as you go through and do these kind of planning. All right. So keep that in mind as we do the diagrams. You'll have to do several passes at this before you get it right as far as having everything mapped out in the order that it occurs in. So this is precedence diagramming method. On the exam, you may well see it not as a diagram like this, although you usually do. You may actually see it as just a list. That we could have a list of the tasks and an extra column. Do I get the column here that says predecessor? No, it doesn't look like it. Yeah, like in Microsoft Project, you can add an extra column here and have it show you
The predecessor.
Oh, wait, can I do it here?
Yep, there's predecessor.
Predecessors, there we go. So I'm just going to add that to the list. Did it do it?
Oh, it doesn't look like you can add it. It's grayed out.
Lame. All right. Well, all right. Well, like in Microsoft Project, you can do it. You can come in here and you can take some of these other ones and add them in to show it. Yeah, I guess this one, it doesn't. Oh, I guess this would be if I wanted to add my own. So I need to take predecessor and hit show selected. There we go. I just need to know my user interface.
Ah, there we go.
And so you can show them and you can see that there. It doesn't show the relationship though, which would be really handy. I wonder if we can do that. We got priority, predecessor, type. Yeah, we'll need type later, but that's
You
not.
need to see.
Yeah, it doesn't have where you can show the relationship. So, the relationship is a real nice thing to see if it's, finish to start or whatever. And on the exam, you may see it that way. It's just a straight up task list with FS and FF or whatever written right beside this number. So if you see 20 SS, that means that task 5 has a start-to-start relationship with whatever task number 20 is, and I've got that hidden, so let me turn that on. This is something you have to be careful with, is that every task has an ID, and it may not be displayed by default. So here's my ID. Just move that over here. So I'm looking at task 21, and task 21 might have a start-to-start relationship with task 20, and so we would see that there in our predecessors column. And in Microsoft Project, it actually writes it right after the predecessor, so it'll say like 22 SS or whatever, which I guess this one just doesn't do. All right, well, so that's the idea behind precedence diagramming method, and that's really the main tool that we've got available to us as we start to sequence our activities. So precedence diagramming method, we figure out the relationship between our activities. You're going to need your subject matter expert, and you're going to say, okay, how exactly does this work as far as the plumbing and the foundation and stuff like that? So I might reach out to somebody like, a lot of our employees had a past life somewhere else. So, we had Rob on the show yesterday who was a carpenter before he became a web designer. Nate, our producer, he actually was a plumber in a past life. And so Nate, can you hear us over there? Let's reach out to him real quick. So Nate, did you ever plumb like a brand new house?
Yes.
All right, so how did that work with the foundation? Did the plumbing go in the foundation?
Under the foundation. We were there
Under?
before the flat work.
Okay, so you would plumb first. What had to be done before you could plumb?
Just the site picked out. And just trenches dug. We're really like the first
the first ones. Okay. So see, this is where you need that expert, because I had no idea. So I don't know if you guys could hear what Nate was saying, but he was saying that plumbing is actually done before the foundation. He said they get in there and they're the first guys. The land might be leveled out, but after that they lay their plumbing in place. They dig their trenches, because a lot of this is going underneath, and then the foundation is poured right on top of the plumbing. So now that I know that, I didn't know.
Yeah.
So when I go to map this stuff out, I need to make sure that I put that in my plan, that plumbing happens first and the foundation doesn't get laid until the plumbers say they're done, right? Or I guess, Nate, you guys wouldn't be completely done, right? You put plumbing in place, but then you still have the stuff that goes in the walls. So that would happen later?
Yep, after the framing is done.
Okay. So yeah, Nate said after the framing is done. So then we have another activity later on. So after the framing of the walls goes in, then the plumbers come back and they run the nozzles and spigots and all that good stuff. I wasn't a plumber, I don't know that stuff. So, all right, so very important, and we start to map that out and we can start to get that idea. Now, I just asked Nate in terms of precedence, the sequencing, that's all I'm worried about here. We've got another process that's coming down the line, which is estimating the duration. Right. Now, if you've got an expert, if you're talking to the plumber, you probably want to do both at the same time. So I could say to Nate, hey, if I've got a 3,000 square foot house with 3 bathrooms, how long do you think that would take to plumb? And he could say, well, based on the dimensions and blah, 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 and how far away you are from the city water hookup and all that stuff, it might take, 5 days or whatever. So you get that estimate, and now you start attaching durations to it. But we're going to see that in a separate process. In real life, you'd probably do this all at the same time.
Right.
All right. So the precedence diagramming method, that's not really telling us the precedence. We have to figure that out. And that's the next part, dependency determination.
Right.
We have to find out what activities depend on other activities. And then once we figure out how they depend, we use PDM to demonstrate it, right? So if I know plumbing's got to be done before foundation, that's finish to start. Plumbing's got to finish before the foundation can start. And the foundation has to finish before the walls can start. And the walls have to finish before the electricians can start. And so you kind of set this sequence in place of what's going to happen. I had no idea that plumbing went first. I kind of assumed it was second. Learn something new every day. All right, now, one thing that PDM doesn't account for. It doesn't account for activities that can occur at the same time, even though one might depend on the other. All right, so you have start to start, where they can start at the same time. But what if there's a little offset? All right, let me give you an example. I might have, for example, a computer project where we are going to receive 400 computers. All right, so we're going to be getting 400 new computers, and obviously that's a lot of machines. And let's get rid of some of these columns. And now I've got all this stuff turned on, I can't see everything. So there. All right, so we're going to receive 400 computers. All right. Now, after I receive the 400 computers, I'm going to have somebody unbox 400 computers. All right. And then after they unbox the computers, I'm going to have someone set up 400 computers. All right, and Ronnie, unboxing computers, that's not a good time.
No.
You got all the styrofoam and all this other stuff that's got to come out, and then somebody's got to set them up, somebody's got to hook up the wires and all that stuff. All right, well, if I just set this up with a straight up finish to start relationship, okay, and I say that, I'm going to receive these computers, let's go like May 19th, okay, and I'm going to say that it's going to take me until the 23rd. Is that perfect? So it's going to take me a week to receive these computers. 400 computers is a lot of computers. Yeah. So I might not get them all in one day. They might come in slowly over a couple of days. But maybe that's unrealistic. But let's say that they do. They all just show up right there in one day. Pow! We get 400 computers, right? Well, unboxing 400 computers is going to take a while. So I'll say that, hey, they can get started on the 18th, right? So this is going to be, actually here, the 20th, right? So finish to start. We finish, we get 400 computers, and then they start unboxing. And the unboxing is going to take 4 days. So I'll set this to the 23rd. There, all right? But nobody can set up computers until they're unboxed. Well, I know the computers, if I look over here, I receive them here on this day, on the 19th, and then we spend 4 days unboxing them. And then I know it's going to take, let's say, 10 days to get them set up. So I'm just going to go in here to duration and say 10 because I don't want to figure out the dates. There. So 4 days to unbox, 10 days to get them set up. Well, 10 days is a pretty long time. If I'm trying to get my schedule to move along faster, I might look at this and say, wait a minute. On day one, so let's say it's 400 computers and it's going to take 4 days. That means they're unboxing about 100 computers a day. So on day two, I've got 100 unboxed computers sitting there doing nothing. On day three, I've got 200 unboxed computers sitting there doing nothing. On day four, I've got 300 unboxed computers sitting there doing nothing. And at the end of day four, all 400 are unboxed. These guys are starting on Monday, right? Well, couldn't these guys, assuming that they're different guys, they're not the same people unboxing that are doing the setup, assuming they're not the same people, couldn't they start setting up the computers as soon as some of the first ones get unboxed? In fact, couldn't I get them to start even on that same day? After maybe I do 4 hours, I give them 4 hours to start unboxing. Well, you know what, let's assume that maybe they do some pallet work, things like that. So maybe we do give them that first day. And so I come over here and I say, you know what, these guys can actually get started early. They can get started here on day two because on day two there's already 100 computers unboxed. And they're going to take 2 weeks. They're going to take 10 days to set up 400 computers. That means they're only setting up 40 a day. So as soon as I have 40 computers unboxed, they can get started. So with that, we can set up what's called lag and lead time. Lead time is when we can get started early. I'm saying these guys could get started early. They could get started 3 days early if we really wanted to. So I'm going to pull up this activity, and when I go into predecessors, here's the predecessor. It's saying that we basically can't get started. We have a finish to start relationship with unboxing. So we can't get started until the unboxing is done. But I've got this delay column. And in the delay, I'm going to put a -3, okay? -3 days. I'm setting a negative delay. A positive is a lag. That's a delay. We've got to wait. A negative is a lead. That means we can get in there ahead of time. So I'm going to set that to -3, and I'll say OK, and see what it just did down here. Now, I've got a finish to start relationship. Unboxing has to finish before I can start setting them up. But I did a 3-day lead time. We can get started 3 days early. They can start setting up the first 100 computers that were unboxed. And so they can get a little bit of head start. I just shaved 3 days off of my schedule. All right. We're going to see this later on again because it's a concept called schedule compression, and it's really important for optimizing a calendar. But for right now, just know that that's lead time. All right. Lead time is a negative delay. Following the same rules, sometimes we have a real delay. So, for example, I might have pour the foundation of the house, and when that's done, frame the walls. Okay? Can't frame the walls until the foundation is poured, so I link those together. And I call the foundation guys, and they say, oh, yeah, we can get in there and put up the wood frame and pour the foundation in 1 day. We can have that foundation done. All right? And the framers come in and they say, well, yeah, you know, it takes us a little longer. It takes us 10 days to get it done, right? So pour the foundation is 1 day, which is the default here in Gantt Project. And frame it, I'll just set to 10 days. There, all right? So this is going to take 11 days to get done. Well, what's the problem here? The problem is, actually, let me change this so it starts on a Monday. So we'll make this start on the 19th. There, okay. So it starts on Monday, and then on Tuesday, we want to frame walls. So the guys get here to frame walls, they go to step on the foundation, and their foot sinks right through. Foundation takes time to dry. Right. You pour a bunch of cement, you've got to let it sit and dry. We've got to give it time, okay? So even though the foundation is done, we can't start with the walls yet. We need what's called lag time. And lag time can be represented 2 ways. One, you could actually create an activity for lag time. You could create an activity that says wait 3 days for the concrete to dry, all right? But that's not realistic because it's not an activity, it's not an action, it's just inaction, right? So the better thing to do is to go into that activity and you go under predecessors and you introduce a positive delay. So I did a negative 3 days earlier. That was a lead time. Now I'm doing a positive 3. That's a lag time. Lag time creates a delay, and now I can see they pour the foundation on the 19th and it's done. And then the 20th, 21st, 22nd, we do nothing. And then the framers can start. It's a finish to start relationship, but now I've got a delay in between it. That is lag and lead time. And on the exam, you'll see them referenced as two different entities, lag and lead. But every project management software I've ever used always uses one value, and it's just either positive or negative. All right. So in Microsoft Project, if I remember right, it's just lead time, right? And you can have a negative lead time, or actually I think it's lag, isn't it?
Lag.
And then you can have a negative lag time, which is lead.
Right.
Here it's just called delay, and if you have a negative delay, then it's a lead time. So on the exam, you'll see lag and lead time.
Right.
Now, how do we know to do that? Subject matter expert, right? We got to ask somebody. All right, well, I definitely went long on this segment. So let's stop here and take a break. When we get back, we're going to talk more about scheduling. I think we are almost done with sequencing activities. We've got a little bit more to talk about there. So stay tuned. We'll be back after this. Okay, so we just got done taking a look at figuring out the dependency of our activities, and the precedents, how they map together. We talked a little bit about lag and lead time, and what?
No.
Oh, I thought I forgot something. No. Well, actually, let's back up on that, because I did forget something. Ronnie pointed out that I passed over one entry in our notes here. So let me pull our notes up. So we talked about our precedence diagramming, right? Finish to start, finish to finish, definitely stuff that we need to be aware of. I talked about lags and leads. I jumped right to that. I skipped over something, and the reason was I was doing it in the project management software, which doesn't really deal with these other entries. These guys right here, dependency determination. Our dependencies can come from different places, different origins. And your project management software doesn't care about this in the slightest, which is why I didn't think of it while I was in there. But you and your company very well may. All right. We have basically 4 different types of dependency dependency that we need to be aware of as far as our organizational skills. And it's basically mandatory or discretionary, internal and external, right? And they're pretty straightforward. A mandatory dependency is one that you can do nothing about. It absolutely has to be. There is no way to put up the walls of that house without having that foundation there first. But you might be able to pre-assemble some of it, I suppose, but you just can't put them up because the foundation's got to be laid. That is an example of a mandatory dependency. And normally when we work with a project, mandatory dependencies are what we deal with, right? But in the early stage of a project, we may set up just what are discretionary dependencies, ones that we throw in there at our own discretion, and later we revisit and revise based on what we know. A discretionary one is where you choose to set that dependency up. I gave the example back here of the unboxing of those computers, these guys here, right? Where I said, unbox the computers, and then only when that's done does the next activity start. And I said, if it's not the same people doing the setup and the unboxing, they could overlap, right? Well, I get to make a choice. My choice is I can hire one team, have one team unbox the computers and set them up, which is going to create a dependency that says one's got to finish before the other can start, and that's it. Or I can hire a second team and have one team unbox and a second team get started early and shave 3 days off my schedule. The difference here is going to be in cost. For 3 days, I'm paying 2 teams, okay? But for that first day, I've only got one team on the clock. For day 5 and onward, I've got one team on the clock. But for days 2, 3, and 4, I'm paying 2 teams. So my payroll costs are going to be a little bit higher, right? This is a discretionary dependency. I get to pick how I want that to be based on the resources that I have. If the resources are available, I can be very, very flexible, all right? We also may just have our own limits. There may be only so many activities that we can monitor at a given time. So I might look at a day and say, wow, I've got 20 different activities going on all in that one day. That's going to blow my mind. All right. So maybe I'll choose to move some around to reduce that schedule a bit so it's not so heavy and make it a little more manageable. I'm doing that just because I feel like it, right? It's my own determination. I can always reverse that later on. So mandatory, we've got to do it, right? It's something we have to do. Discretionary, it's based on something else, right? It's just knowledge that we've got, best practices, some reason that we choose to implement. It doesn't have to be that way, but we choose to make it so. All right. When you put something in the project management software, it assumes it's mandatory. It says you can't deviate from this, but you can go in and change it. It has to act that way because it doesn't know. It doesn't have intelligence, right? It's just acting on the information you give it. The other two, internal and external dependencies. Internal dependencies are typically ones that you can make a difference with, right? An internal dependency is one set by your company. If your company decided the deadline was going to be a certain date, well, your company can decide to have a different deadline, right? That's an internal dependency. So if we decide that we want to start encrypting all of our computers, and we set a date of July 31st, well, what if we're not ready July 31st? Yeah. And we say, well, let's move it back to August 31st. We can do that. It was our own thing that we picked, and so our dependencies and stuff, that's just internal. We can move it. But what if the United States government said by July 31st, every corporation has to have their computers encrypted? Well, now we're dealing with external dependencies, things that we can't vary, right? So we've got to be done by that date. It's like a fixed date. You see this oftentimes with contractors. I say, all right, I need to get the house framed. I need to get these walls put up, okay? I'm going to call in contractors to do it. And the contractors say, well, we're only available the second week of July. So it doesn't matter what else I do. Those guys are not going to be available until the second week of July. So if all of my work is done at the end of June, then there's nothing I can do that first week of July because I'm waiting on this external dependency, these contractors. I could try and find other contractors, but if it's the last minute, if it comes down to the wire, I've just got to wait. It's an external dependency, all right? Again, the project management software, it doesn't know that. It has no idea whether it's internal or external. Well, at least not the software I've used. Some of the more advanced software might do that, but like Microsoft Project has no clue. Nope. So be mindful of these. You'll see these terms on the exam. You'll use these terms in real life. Your software likely won't demonstrate that. All right. So these are the tools of the trade that we're going to use. We're going to take our activity list. We're going to apply all this to it to figure out the sequencing, not worrying so much about duration, right? We're just thinking about sequencing, and oftentimes Microsoft Project defaults to 1 day for activities. Gantt Project defaults to 1 day. So we just put all these activities in as 1 day activities, right? And then we come back and we start to establish things like duration and all that based on additional information we get. Right. All right. So our output, once this is done, is usually two things, right? Project document updates. We update our activity list, we update our attributes and so on to reflect these new values. But the other thing that we have is our project schedule network diagram, or sometimes you'll see it abbreviated as PSND, project schedule network diagram. What is that, right? Well, I kind of showed one without saying what the name of it was. If I go up here to, in Gantt Project, they call it a PERT chart. But this is a project schedule network diagram. It's showing how each of these different tasks relate to each other and kind of mapping them out calendar style so I can see what falls where in my project, and I can kind of scroll around and see that stuff. So it's basically kind of mapping it out for me so I can see what's what in the layout. I don't like these because I don't get a lot of value out of them. Some people love these things because you get, as opposed to a Gantt chart where all your data is really over here and these bars are separate. In the PERT chart here, you'll see where the data is actually in each individual task. But what I don't like about these is how they represent duration. See how that's a 1 day and this is a 10 day, but they look the same, right? That's one of the things that I don't like about how it lays this stuff out. But this is the diagram. If you use these, you can create them by hand, but every little change you make can have vast effect on a diagram like this. So you usually only have them if you've got project management software. Yep. All right. So those are some of the different tools or different things that we're going to output from here. Whoop, that's not what I wanted. There we go. So our project schedule network diagrams, but more importantly, project document updates. We're going to go and update the documentation we've generated so far and get that all thrown in there. All right, now's where things get a little tricky. Now, we understand the order that things occur in. Now we need to figure out how we can actually stick dates on this stuff. So at this point, I may have mapped it all out, but not with any actual dates attached to it whatsoever. So in that scenario, I need to kind of think about the actual dates. And here we've got beginning and end date and all that stuff. In the early stages of a project, what a lot of people will do is in their software, they'll show this duration, and then they'll take the beginning and end date and just kind of put them out of mind, right? Say, we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to go, oh, I should get rid of that type also. That's pointless right now. Let's see, I got duration, ID, type. Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave type in. I just need to rearrange these is what I need to do. Let me get the duration back here. There. So as we go through, we're mapping each of these activities. We're specifying their duration just in days. So this one's 10 days. This one's 4 days. Maybe this is a 3-day. This is a 2-day. Just kind of mapping those in terms of duration or not even thinking of that. If we're in the early phases of this project, I might just come through here and put 1 for each of these, right? Not worrying about duration, just I've got nested activities here. I was like, why is it not letting me change? But if I expand that, I've got nested activities. So just putting them in here as 1 and then coming back and modifying it later. So you'll see where people do that. And that's because they're not worried about how long this stuff is going to take just yet. They're just trying to map out the relationship between each activity. All right. So next, we need to come back and figure out how we're going to attach dates. And one of the big determining factors is going to be the duration, how long these things take. The other determining fact is going to be the resources needed. All right. If I have 1 hammer and I have 2 activities that both need that hammer, then they can't occur at the same time. One has to happen, then the next, so that they can share the hammer, right? Or I can buy a new hammer, and now I got 2, and now they can happen at the same time. So resources have a direct effect of when our activities can occur. And then the other thing is just how long the activities take. We need to find this information, and we've got 2 separate processes for that. We're going to worry about duration a little bit later, so we're going to look at resources first, and then we'll worry about duration afterwards, okay? Resources are a particular challenge for us because there's a lot of information and a lot of things that can go wrong. So when it comes to figuring out the resources, we have estimate activity resources. We have a process. It kind of reminds me of like the iPhone. There's an app for that.
Oh, yeah.
In project management, there's a process for that. So whatever it is you can think of, there's a process for it. Or at least 47 things you can think of. So here we're going to take a look at activity resources. I need to figure out, now that I know the activities are going to happen, what do I need to make them happen? And there's usually 2 things we're thinking about here: human resources and material resources, right? Those are typically what we need. Humans, we need people to do the work, and then those people need equipment and materials, right? So if we're framing the walls, we need 2x4s, we need nails or screws, we need hammers, we need impact drills or whatever. You have various tools and things of the trade. Probably need a level, chalk line, all that good stuff. So these are materials that we need to secure so that this can happen, right? As well as the people themselves. The more people and the more equipment we have, usually the faster we can get the job done. The less people, the less equipment we have, usually the longer it takes to get done. So you see where resources and duration are really closely related. And so in real life land, you'll find that you typically do these at the same time. When I'm calculating my resources, I'm actually calculating my duration at the same time. And when I'm calculating my duration, I'm calculating my resources. So we normally do these combined. But to make sure that we understand it on the show here, we're going to do them separately.
Right.
So we're just going to look at resources for right now. All right. Our inputs here are going to be really similar to what we saw in the other activities, but we do have a few new things in here. Schedule management plan, activity list, activity attributes, that's pretty normal. Enterprise environmental factors, organizational process assets, those are pretty normal. The ones that are new are number 4 through 6 right here. All right, so let's take a look at each one. Number 4 is a resource calendar. Resources may only be available to you at certain times, and so we need to be aware of this. Where it's most visible is with your employees. If your employees work 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, and that's it, can you have project activities occur on Saturday? No. Can they occur on Sunday? No. Can they occur at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday? No. In fact, you've got 8 to 5 with, say, a 1-hour lunch break. You've really only got 8 hours of work that can occur in a day. So you need to look at your employees and say, when do they work? What's their schedule like? Are there holidays? Do they work 3 or 4 10-hour shifts, or do they work 5 8-hour shifts? That's going to impact our project. And the way we find that out is with what's called a resource calendar. Technically, every employee has a resource calendar. And in most project management software, you create a default calendar, which applies to your employees as a whole. And then if you have employees that work special schedules, you create dedicated resource calendars for them. So in a hospital, you might have doctors that work from 8 to 5 every day, but then you've got nurses that work 10 or 12-hour shifts 3 days a week, and so you want to track that separate. So you'll have resource calendars for each job role or for even each individual person. And oftentimes you'll have that. I know it sounds like a headache, but because there might be something like vacation time, right? Maybe I'm taking a vacation for 1 week in July, which we need to get on the calendar because I am. Right. And maybe, Ronnie, maybe you're taking a week of vacation in August.
Right.
So my resource calendar is going to show that I'm not available for a week in July. Yours is going to show you're not available for a week in August. So any activity attached to me is going to be slower in July, and any activity attached to you is going to be slower in August. That's what resource calendars do. Now, we may have to make them ourselves, but more often than not, you go to human resources and you get them from them. So we've got a separate process for that, where we'll take a look at it a little bit later. But let me just kind of scroll down here to human resource management. Under human resource management, we have plan human resource management, and a part of that is developing the resource calendars. And so, so you'll see some of that there. But the reason it's listed up here is because your resource might not be a human. It might be wood. It might be a hammer. You know.
Yeah.
So we probably don't have a resource calendar for a hammer, but we do have to track whether the hammer is already in use by some other activity. Something that you might have a resource calendar for, though, is if you're renting equipment. If I'm renting a truck to move materials, I might have that truck Tuesday and Wednesday of the 3rd week in July. And that may not be flexible. It may be booked solid every other week. That's the only time I can get it. And so if I start running behind schedule, I can get in real trouble because I only have that resource available for those 2 days. I've got to get that stuff done in those 2 days or I'm out of luck. Right? You see this with contractors a lot. The contractors give you one particular day or one particular week they can come out and do it. And if you can't, the next day might be weeks later. Your entire project schedule can be derailed. So those resource calendars are pretty important. You'll want to make sure that you collect those. You don't normally have to make them, right? You're given them. If you call that rental agency and say, I need to rent a truck, what days is it available? And they tell you, oh, it's available the 2nd week in July, they just gave you the resource calendar, right? You just need to enter it into your project management software. And you know, I can't remember if Gantt project will do that. Let's see. So if I create a resource in here, new resource. So we'll create a resource here called Don Pizzette, right? And so here we go. I don't really have a role. Here, I'll make myself project manager. Oh, well, it's got days off, and so you got that. So here in the days off, I can come in and specify dates that I'm not going to be here. So if I say we'll pick some week in July here, week of July 7th through July 11th. All right. So I'm going to add that as a week that I've got off. It's a vacation. Nobody else will have that, but maybe just me. That's now creating a resource calendar for me. I'm not available then. The only thing it isn't doing is it's not letting me set like a custom, like what my work hours are. So, you know, maybe my work hours are not 8 to 5. Maybe they're 7 to 4 or something like that. So Gantt project is pretty basic, so it doesn't let me do that. But you'll see in Microsoft Project and other software, where you actually can get very, very granular. Yeah, you can specify different lunch breaks, and that's important if you're managing down to the hour.
Yeah. Even in Microsoft Project, you can specify like if they're getting a raise during the middle of a particular period. It's amazing.
Great point. Yeah, if you oh, here we go. I'm just kind of scrolling along, and there's my vacation
there you go.
logged right in there. So, just kind of looking at my calendar, you can see I've got something flagged here. And what this is listing is your availability. Normally you'd be 100% available. See how I'm negative 1% available? That's letting me know that, hey, I can't be put on the books that week. So, but yeah, when we're calculating our budget, if somebody gets a raise mid-project, our expenses go up.
Yeah.
And so we do need to be able to track that. And yeah, Gantt Project won't do that, but Microsoft Project does.
It's amazing how granular you can get.
All right, so that's an example of a resource calendar and something we definitely need to think about. Another one is a risk register. We'll talk about risk registers in the risk management processes. So if we come in here, you can find risk down here. So identify risks. One of the outputs for that process is the risk register. A lot like your stakeholder register, it's a list of the risks and what you're going to do about them. Well, when you're setting up your schedule, you need to plan for those risks. If there's a possible outcome that leads to delay or whatever, you need to plan for that. And so it's going to feed into this. We don't have that information yet, so this is something where we'd have to go and do that other process and then come back with the information that we need.
Right.
All right, and the last one there, activity cost estimates. Now, the cost estimates don't really have a lot to do with our schedule unless we're talking about employee overtime.
Right.
All right. If we have employees that can work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 40 hours, great. If I need them to work 50 hours, can I do it? Yes, right? You can do it, but you may have to pay overtime. And so we may need those cost estimates, and we may actually feed into the cost estimates if we start assigning overtime. So tracking that is important for us. And on the exam, a lot of times you'll see overtime referred to as oversubscription.
Yeah.
And that means that you've given an employee, you've given a resource more work than what they can actually handle in a normal day. Or over allocation is another term. Over allocation can also mean you've given them 2 tasks to do at the same time, though. So, so overtime is usually just when they're working extra. All right. So those are some of the inputs that we have. The rest of these we've already seen before. So we need to get this information together. I think I've nicked each one. Yeah, so we're good there. All right, so those are all the inputs. Once we've got all that data, now we can start figuring out what resources are appropriate for our calendar, for our schedule. We may say, all right, I have something to do the second week of July. I have an activity scheduled. Don's not available. Ronnie is, though. All right, so it can happen. But if Ronnie and I were both gone that week, then that activity wouldn't be able to happen that week. That's why we need things like that, the resource calendars, to be able to start planning it. All right. Now, when we start looking at our tools and techniques, a lot of these are ones that we've already seen before, like expert judgment. That is the nice thing about this is, yeah, there's a lot of processes, but a lot of them have the same techniques that are a part of them, so it becomes a little bit easier to learn. All right. Now, some of these are different, though. We are going to see some special expert judgment techniques that we've got, but we're running a little short on time on the segment. So let's do this, Ronnie. Let's stop here and take a break. And when we get back, we're going to talk about the assorted tools and techniques we've got for doing our activity resource estimations and get a kind of a chance to see some of that. And then once we're done, we'll wrap up from there. So
Sounds good.
Stay tuned. We'll be back in a few. Okay, so we've seen the inputs, what we're feeding into our decision-making process. Now we need to make some decisions. Now, I know we said that we've seen a lot of these before, but there are some neat new things in here that we definitely need to be aware of. Under our expert judgment, right? This means just using our noodle. We need to figure out what resources each activity is going to need. And you know your company better than I'm going to know it. And so when you look at each activity, you get an idea. We mentioned the IT Pro TV arcade cabinet project, right? I knew, hey, when we needed to build out a cabinet, Rob used to be a carpenter. Great, we can get him. He used to make cabinets, so this would be perfect. He's the resource that I want working on that. And I knew when we needed those electronics that Nate is the hobbyist. He loves soldering things onto circuit boards, and so he's the go-to guy for that. So you kind of already have an idea of what resources match up with what activities. And when you created your requirements list and all that, you're starting to get an idea of the equipment and materials you need also. So you may have been very thorough in prior activity or prior tasks and gotten a better idea of what you need before here, but if you didn't, this is your chance to start revisiting that and finding out what you need. So on the expert judgment side of things, we got a few different things to look at here. There's alternatives analysis, right? Which is just looking for secondary ways of doing things. We may have one idea, there may be other ones. So I know that if we want to frame the house, we could use wood or we could use metal for the beams, right? Which one do we use? Doesn't matter to me, but maybe there's a big cost difference between the two, but either way, I'm gonna need to get them. So it may be that I can buy wooden, what are those called? Is it truss work? What are the walls, the frame? Anyhow, I can buy wooden 2x4s down at Home Depot or wherever. But if I wanna get the metal supports, I might not be able to just go and buy those at the store. I might have to order those. And so that's going to affect my schedule. I need to understand the materials that I need. And if I go and find out for the metal ones, it's going to take 2 months, but I could have the wood ones tomorrow. This might be a time to change our mind on what resource we use. Right. Hey, let's go ahead and go with the wood because we can get them tomorrow, right? Published estimating data. What if we have no idea what resource we're going to need? Right?
Right.
Well, we can go out and get published estimating data. You see this in construction a lot. One of the best examples is a software package called Timberline. If you're going to build a house, you go into Timberline and you specify the square footage, you specify the, how many floors it's going to have, you feed all that information into the software, and it gives you an estimate of how much wood you'll need, how much equipment, and so forth. Now, it's an estimate. Things can always change, but this is published data that they release, and it saves you from having to try and figure it out yourself, all right? So you might have specialized software that does it. I haven't seen that Timberline software in a long time. We'll see if they still make it. So Timberline construction management software. They sure do. Look at that. Oh, now it's Sage 300. Did it get bought? I guess it did. All right. Well, you'll see this is software specifically, there we go, for the construction industry, and it's got built into it where it can do real estate management and so on, but it can also do estimates for when you're doing construction. And you'll find software out there like this for your industry. So look for that. Or it might not be software. It might be that you go to Gartner Group and they tell you, hey, the last time somebody did this project, here's all the resources they needed. And so you can go and kind of find that, piece it all together. It's excellent stuff. So let's see if we can find construction estimating software. There we go. Who's number one in this niche?
Pro Contractor MS.
QuickBid estimating and bidding software. Bid for build. These all sound just like very reputable software. Construction estimators for concrete.
Nice.
Here we go. So you'll see here you're punching in information about the area that you're going to be pouring cement in, right? So here they've got conic footings and the quantities and so on. And then it's estimating out that for you. And sometimes they even have general pricing. This one has labor costs in it and so on. And they're pulling from data they've gathered from the real markets. And usually this type of software is subscription based. So if you buy it, you have to pay an ongoing subscription to keep getting updated information. If you don't continue your subscription, your data becomes obsolete. And if you make decisions based on obsolete data, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yep.
So be careful with estimating software. It needs to be up to date. All right. So published estimating data, it can come in the form of just regular reports or software packages that are very dynamic. I've seen some advanced ones over the years. If you don't have that, your next best bet is bottom-up estimating. What is bottom-up estimating? Well, what we do is we go back to our work breakdown structure. This is where we'll normally go. And you look at all the work that has to be done as part of a milestone, and you start from the bottom and work your way up, kind of adding all that together to figure out the total amount of resources that you need. Let's see, I don't have my work breakdown structure open anymore. Let me see if I can just find a generic one real quick, and we'll use that. Find somebody who's got one. That's a pretty decent one, I think. Oh, actually, I like this one better. All right, so here's just a simple one. This is from cnx.org. I don't know what they are, but they've got some kid cleaning the room, right? So cleaning your room and all the different things that are underneath it. With bottom-up estimating, we don't just go right here. What's it going to take to clean the room? Because I don't know.
Yep.
We start way down here, and we say, all right, connect hose and plug, empty bag, vacuum carpet. What does it take to get each one of these done? And when I add all that up from the bottom up, I end up with a total set of resources that I'm going to need for that. All right. The only danger with this model, well, there's two issues with the model. Issue number one is if I forgot an activity, if I left a work package out of here, then I'm not going to plan for it. But that's a risk anyway. The other one is it just takes a long time. It takes a long time to go individual item by item by item and tally all that up and put it together into one big thing. So it may not be the most rapid or advantageous method for us. So you might want to choose some other opportunity there. But it does work, and if you've got no other alternative, it's really all you've got.
Right.
So you start at the bottom and you work your way up, tallying it. All right. Another one they don't really list here is, well, I guess it falls under expert judgment, is a subject matter expert. Mm-hmm. You can bring in a contractor or a pro, somebody who does this for a living, and get them to map out all the resources that you're going to need. So that would be expert judgment from someone else. And then our project management software, as we lay out our various activities, we can feed it in there, or like I was trying to show Timberline, but it's now Sage 300 or whatever. So that did project management as well as estimating. So your software might do it. Now, quick comment on this. Project management software is the official term from PMI, but they stay away from that acronym. Ronnie was commenting on this earlier. It would abbreviate to PMS, which they don't like to use.
Yeah.
So on the exam, you'll oftentimes see it as PMIS, Project Management Information Software. And so what they'll do is they'll write Project Management Software and then abbreviate it PMIS. And so you'll see it kind of written either way. Mm-hmm. If you page through the PMBOK, you'll see both. Right. It's one of the few where they're not completely consistent. So, all right, did we leave anything out? Project management software, bottom-up estimating. Yeah, we are good to go there. Keep in mind that your estimates may need to be revised a few times. You might put a placeholder estimate. It is an estimate, so you might put a placeholder in there and a note that says this estimate is not done with certainty. We need to revisit it. Right? While you're in planning, you can do that. When we move from planning to executing, though, these estimates, they need to be as close to fact as possible, based on the best information. And one of the rules of thumb I have is anytime I make an estimate, I always can include information as to how I made the estimate. What information did I use to make it? All right, there's a reason for this. Let's say that you have estimating software, but your subscription's expired and your company doesn't want to pay to renew the subscription. And so they say, you know what, we don't want to pay for that, just use the data that's already in there. And you say, well, I can do that, but the data's old, so do we really want to act on that? And they say, yeah, it'll be fine, okay? So when I use that software and I create the estimate, I put in there estimate based on outdated information, right? And I put why, put that in there, all right? Then later on, when the project is moving forward and the estimate is wrong, and they come down and they say, why was this wrong? What happened? Well, you can say, I'm sorry, I did the best I could. You made me use this data that was out of date, and this is what happened. And they say, okay, we made that decision. It was a risk, and we accepted the risk. As opposed to saying, you did a terrible estimate, and it's all your fault. Well, it's not. We need to make sure we have that on record, okay? You can record it as part of the estimate itself before you write that down, or as a part of any project, we'll see this later, you create a incident register. So a list of any incident that occurs, and it can go in there too. That's another place where you can have that. All right, so those are the tools and techniques that we're going to use. Then we start to get our outputs. Now we've got several outputs here, right? the activity resource requirements. That's where we go back to our activities and we update them to put the resource requirements in there. When I created the tasks in Gantt project, and remember PMI doesn't use that word task, right? These are activities to them. I need to create my resources, and you have what's called a resource register. So I've got Don Pizzette in there, and maybe I keep doing that. So maybe I create an entry. The keyboard shortcut for creating a resource is the same as the keyboard shortcut for hiding a window in Apple OS X. So I create one here for Ronnie, and we'll make you'll be a project manager also. Can never have too many project managers, right? So we come through and we record our people right in here, and then when we create our activities, like task 5 here, we can go into our task properties and we can assign the resources. And so I can come in here and I can add in me, right? And so I'm added in and now I'm working on it. So attaching a resource to it is how we can start to see whether somebody's already busy at that time and so on. So that's what they're saying right here is our activity resource requirements. We go to our activities and I put in there, hey, I need one web developer, I need one graphics designer, and so on. You may not know who the people are yet. In fact, you rarely do. So oftentimes our resource entries start out very generic. When I go into my project in the very beginning, I might not know that Ronnie is going to be this assistant project manager. I might just put assistant PM1, all right? And I might also have web designer 1 and web designer 2, it just kind of depends. I create generic ones because I know that I'm going to need a web designer or 2, right? And so I put those in here so I can attach them to the activities right now, right? This is my activity requirements, right? So I put them in there, and then later on, when the PMO or human resources, whoever says, okay, well, for your web designer, you're going to have Rob. And so then I just come back here and I edit this and I change it from web designer 1 to Rob McGarry, right? So I punch that in and now it's Rob. And Microsoft Project, Gantt project, whatever it is that you're using will automatically update the activities to reflect that new person, because there's actually, they don't show it here, but there's an ID that, I guess I can't show it. Yeah, but there is a hidden ID in the background where there's a number attached to them, so it maps that. But basically, you assign it that way. So at this stage in the game, these may be real people that we're mapping, or they might be virtual people, right? Web designer 1, drywall installer 5, whatever it is that we choose to put in there. We might also choose to create what's called a resource breakdown structure. Just like a work breakdown structure, a resource breakdown structure takes a person. So I might have Ronnie, and underneath him have all of the activities that Ronnie is going to be performing, breaking down his role inside of the project. Now, I don't normally make these manually. If you have project management software, when you attach Ronnie to 5 different tasks, you can go in and pull it up there. Gantt project doesn't have that feature, but like Microsoft Project does. So you can see exactly what it is that they have attached to them and get a feel for how involved they are in the project. And then the last output here is just project document updates. So as we start to come up with these, we may have changes we may need to make to other places. Remember way back when we did the work breakdown structure, in the WBS dictionary, it had a resources field in there. So if we found new resources here, we need to go back and add them there. Same thing with our schedule. As we were just creating the activities, we may find more information and update them. So we're always updating our other documents. All right. Now, as far as templates, I think I've only got one for this. Let me go find, we already talked about activity lists, and we need here activity resource requirements. And I want to say I have resource breakdown structure. Yeah, so let's start here with the activity resource requirements. All right, really simple template. We have our work breakdown structure ID, so what the work package is, what the type of resource is. Usually this is going to be person or material, right? This is usually all we have. The quantity, so I need 5 web designers. And then any assumptions I make, like I assume that they're good web designers. If they're bad web designers, I might need 10 of them, so that can make a difference. But I might put metal studs. Nate put in the chat here that they're called studs. So I might put metal studs that I need 12 of them, and my assumption is that I can get them in a reasonable amount of time. If I can't, then I need 12 wooden studs because I know I can get those fast, right? So this is basically how an activity resource requirements list works. Not anything too terribly fancy in here. All right. And then the resource breakdown structure, again, not a terribly fancy thing. It can be. It can be as fancy as you want. I don't normally make these. But you're basically doing the same thing as the work breakdown structure. You have your people, and then underneath them, so here's people just in general, and then I say, it says quantity of role 1, so I might say 5 web developers, right? And then underneath that, what they're doing, so resource level 1, resource level 2, and so on. Equipment, materials, supplies, locations, whatever it is I want to break down, and then all the activities that are attached to those people, so I can start to map that together. That's an example of a resource breakdown structure. Now, I mentioned I don't normally make these. Well, I don't, because you can track all of this in your project management software. You use this type of template if you don't have project management software, which some people don't. But if you've got Microsoft Project, Primavera, Open Workbench, Gantt Project, any of these, they usually have this functionality right in there. No sense in dealing with a bunch of separate paperwork. So those are some of the examples of the documents that we're going to be outputting that become a part of this, and they're important. We've got to have this stuff done because we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's, right? We're making sure that everything's in line. We need to identify anywhere that we're lacking employees or lacking materials. And in those cases, we're going to have to bring it in from the outside. And now we're at the whim of somebody else's schedule. If we're bringing in contractors, right, we've got to find out their availability to update our calendars. If we're bringing in materials, like our arcade cabinet one, right? So we have to order a lot of stuff, a lot of buttons, joysticks, all sorts of things. I don't know how long it's going to take to get that stuff. So we need to find that out. And that's an external dependency. Our schedule is really hinging on those ship dates. I don't know how long it's going to take. Right. So we've got to visit that, or our arcade cabinet project could be destined for failure. So the world would end if we don't finish that arcade cabinet. So, all right, so keep that kind of thing in mind. Resource planning is hard. You're going to see a common theme here as we hit some of these planning processes, is that it might feel a little incomplete. There was a lot of stuff there dealing with the resources where we're just not able to make definitive decisions yet. Right. You'll see the same thing with durations. You'll see the same thing with just the activities in general, sequencing the activities. This is because we're going to go through this multiple times. As we get more information, we come back and revisit these. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it's definitely a refining process, right? The very fact is what we're hoping for is to get this locked down as much as we can, because once we actually start hitting that execution, we really don't want to change anything that we don't have to. So this part, taking the time to do it right, is the key.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, well, that leaves us 2 more processes: estimate activity durations and develop the schedule. Estimate activity durations, this is going to be one of the first times that we have formulas. We're going to see math on this one. So it's a bit of a challenging topic. I want to make sure we address it thoroughly. So why don't we save that for the next episode, and we'll do a sequel. Are we already on part 2?
Part 1.
We're on part 1. So it'll be a part 2 to this episode. So right there on the screen, if I would look at what we see. Anyhow, so all right. So we'll catch that all in the next episode. Definitely stay tuned for that. We're gonna leave with a cliffhanger, right? So the action-packed, exciting conclusion to time management will be to follow. All right. Well, let me just remind everybody that if you have any questions, jump on over to our website, itpro.tv/live, and you'll see the chat room right beneath the video. You can post your questions there. We monitor and answer. If you have questions while we're off air, right? So if you're watching reruns, then you can jump on into our Q&A forums. There's a Q&A link at the top of every page. Use it. Click that. It'll take you to the forums. Post your questions. We monitor and answer. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm Don Pizzette.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
And we will see you next time.